According to the legal documents I was holding, my husband didn't just cheat on me. He had signed over 60% of my family's logistics company directly into his mistress's name. He was smiling across the kitchen island, asking what was for dinner, while completely oblivious to the fact that my estate lawyer had built a hidden drag-along trap into the original operating agreement 5 years ago. Look, when Marcus took over as acting managing director while I took medical leave, he thought he'd found the ultimate legal loophole. He thought he was play-acting a corporate takeover behind my back with a woman he introduced to the office as his senior analyst. And honestly, he genuinely believed I was too oblivious to catch the paper trail before the final transfer cleared the bank. If you're new here, subscribe. I post a new story every day. Because trust me, watching someone celebrate a victory that is literally designed to ruin them in court, that is a whole different level of karma. Okay, let me take a step back and lay this out, because when I first saw the signature page, my hands were literally shaking. Not out of fear, though. Out of pure, unadulterated shock at how arrogant a person can get when they think they're the smartest room in the building. My grandfather built Vance Logistics from a 2-truck operation into a regional carrier. When Marcus and I got married 7 years ago, he was an ambitious corporate accountant who swore up and down that he wanted to help me expand the brand. My dad was skeptical. God rest his soul, my dad looked Marcus dead in the eye during our engagement dinner and told my lawyer to make sure the core assets were completely untouchable. Now here's where I'd have lost it if I were my dad back then. Marcus signed the prenuptial amendments without even reading the fine print because he was so desperate to get his hands on the executive title. Wait, let me reread that part of the filing again just to be clear. The clause didn't say he couldn't transfer shares. It said if any unapproved equity transfer was attempted to an unauthorized third party. It immediately triggered an automatic buyback of all outstanding executive stock at a valuation of exactly $1 per share. Yeah, $1 single. So while Marcus was spending 3 months sneaking around with this woman, let's call her Chloe, drafting assignment agreements and trying to rebrand my family's life work, he was literally signing his own financial death warrant. I mean, how do you sit across from your spouse every evening for dinner, look them in the eye, and pretend everything is fine while you're executing a literal heist? Would you have confronting him the second you found the files? Or would you have played along like I did? Drop a comment below, because I struggled with this for 3 straight days. I chose to play completely blind. I let him keep taking Chloe out to expensive dinners on the corporate card, which, by the way, I was secretly auditing every Friday afternoon. I watched him walk into the kitchen with that puffed-out chest, talking about how busy the office was getting and how hard he was working to secure our future. Our future. Can you imagine the sheer nerve? What he didn't realize was that my attorney, Arthur, a guy who has been handling corporate litigation since before Marcus was born, was just waiting for the transfer to hit the county registry. See, in order for Marcus to legally complete the shift of power to Chloe, he had to file a certified copy of the stock transfer ledger with the state business registry. The moment that stamp hit the paper, the trap closed. And that brings us to the actual day of the board meeting. Marcus had called an emergency executive session at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. He didn't invite me, obviously. He thought I was home taking rest. He walked into the main conference room with Chloe right beside him, wearing a brand new custom suit, holding a leather folder like he was about to deliver a State of the Union address. What do you think happens when a man who thinks he's king realizes he's actually broke? Asterisk. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, the same table my grandfather sat at for 30 years. He slid the documents across to the minor board members, claiming that under his management authority, he was restructuring the capital holding to optimize investment interest. That was his fancy way of saying, I just stole the company and gave it to my girlfriend. Chloe was sitting there, smirking, looking around the room like she already owned the artwork on the walls. She even had the nerve to ask the executive assistant to bring her a specific brand of sparkling water before the meeting started. Right as Marcus picked up his pen to declare the new ownership structure officially recognized by the board, the heavy double doors at the back of the conference room swung open. It wasn't just me walking in. It was Arthur, carrying 2 thick leather binders, accompanied by a court-appointed process server. The look on Marcus's face. Absolute priceless. His face went from smug victory to total, drained paleness in about 3 seconds flat. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, trying to hide the signature page under his forearm. "This is an internal operational review." I didn't even say a word. I just pulled out the chair directly opposite him, sat down, and nodded to Arthur. Arthur stepped forward, adjusted his glasses, and placed a single sheet of paper directly over Marcus's hands. "Mr. Vance," Arthur said in that calm, ice-cold legal tone. "You just executed document 4B. Marcus tried to pull a power move. He stood up, slammed his hand on the desk, and said, "I am the managing director. I have full operational authority granted by the marital trust." I looked at Chloe. She was staring at Marcus, clearly starting to panic because this was definitely not part of the fairy tale takeover plan he had sold her. I'll be honest, I thought he would at least have a lawyer present who had read the foundational charter. But Marcus's hubris was his biggest blind spot. He relied on an online contract template to draft the transfer to Chloe, thinking no one would check the master bylaws registered in the state archives. Arthur read Section 12, Paragraph C out loud to the entire room. The voiceover of that moment in my head still sounds like pure music. Any unauthorized attempted transfer of equity to a non-lineal heir or non-vetted entity immediately forfeits all executive stock options back to the founding trust for the sum of $1. Silence. Total, suffocating silence fell over that room. Chloe looked at Marcus. "What is he talking about? Marcus, what is he talking about?" Marcus tried to grab the binder from Arthur's hands. "That's outdated. That was superseded by the 2021 restructuring." "No, Marcus," I finally spoke up, keeping my voice as low and steady as humanly possible. "It wasn't. You signed the agreement amendment 3 months after our wedding. Remember. Have you ever seen someone realize their entire life is collapsing in real time?" Asterisk. He sank back down into his chair like his legs had completely given out. He stared at the paper, his eyes darting back and forth across the clauses, trying desperately to find a loophole that didn't exist. The process server stepped forward and handed him the formal notice of termination, effective immediately. He wasn't just losing the shares he tried to steal, he was being stripped of his position, his salary, his corporate vehicle, and his access to the building. Chloe's posture completely shifted. The smirk was gone. The attitude was gone. She turned to Marcus and said, "You told me this company was yours. You said you own 60%. "I do," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "I mean, I did. There's been a mistake." The only mistake, Arthur chimed in, shutting his binder with a heavy thud, was assuming Mrs. Vance didn't protect her legacy. I stood up, looked at the board members who were sitting there in absolute shock, and said, "Meeting adjourned." Security is on their way up to escort former employees out of the building. Marcus didn't even try to gather his things from the corner office. He followed me out into the hallway, leaving Chloe sitting alone at that giant table, practically hyperventilating as she realized she had hitched her wagon to a complete fraud. "Wait, please," Marcus begged, running after me down the carpeted hallway. "We can talk about this. It was a tax strategy. I was doing it to protect us from capital gains. Now, listen to that excuse. A tax strategy." I turned around right outside the elevator bay and looked at him. "A tax strategy that put 60% of my father's company into a 26-year-old analyst's personal LLC. I asked him, "Do you really think I'm that stupid?" He reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back before his hand could even come close. "I was going to tell you," he lied, his eyes pleading. "We were growing apart, yes, but I was doing this to force a conversation about our future." I mean, the audacity of someone trying to spin literal corporate embezzlement into a marriage counseling tactic. I literally laughed in his face. It wasn't even an angry laugh, it was just genuine amazement at how deep his delusion went. By the time we got down to the lobby, security had already been notified. 2 of our longest-serving building guards, guys who had known my father for 20 years, were waiting by the turnstiles. Marcus had to hand over his keycards, his company phone, and the keys to the Mercedes the firm had leased for him. Watching him stand in the marble lobby of Vance Logistics, holding a cardboard box with a desk lamp and a few framed photos while the front desk receptionist watched. That was the moment it really hit him. He was completely on the outside. Chloe didn't even walk out of the building with him. She took the service elevator down to the basement parking garage, got into her own car, and blocked his number before she even pulled out onto the main street. I found out later from one of the office managers that she had packed her desk within 20 minutes of the meeting ending and left without saying a single word to anyone. Talk about honor among thieves, right? The second the money disappeared, she was gone like smoke. Over the next 2 weeks, the full extent of Marcus's arrogance came out in the forensic audit Arthur ordered. He hadn't just tried to transfer the stock. He had been slowly draining the emergency operational reserves into offshore accounts registered under Chloe's name. He thought he was being smooth, using fake consultancy invoices and inflated vendor fees to mask the transfers. Now here's where I'd have lost my mind completely if Arthur wasn't such an absolute genius. Because the drag-along trap clause was triggered, Marcus wasn't just stripped of his equity, he was legally classified as a faithless servant under state corporate law. Do you know what that means? It means under our state jurisdiction, a faithless servant has to disgorge every single cent of compensation they received during the period of their disloyalty. Every salary check, every performance bonus, every single expense account reimbursement he used for his secret weekend trips with Chloe. He owed the estate nearly $400,000 in back pay alone. If you were in my shoes, would you have settled out of court to save the public drama, or would you have pushed for total financial liquidation? Asterisk. I didn't settle for a dime. My friends told me to just sign the divorce papers, take the company back, and let him walk away so I could heal. They said, "You got the company back, isn't that enough?" No, it wasn't enough. Because my father worked 18-hour days for 30 years, driving trucks through freezing winters to build that business from nothing. Marcus didn't just try to rob me, he tried to erase my family's lifetime of hard work so he could play big shot in front of a mistress. So I told Arthur to press every single button available under the law. We filed for emergency civil fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and immediate freezing of all marital assets pending the divorce trial. When the court date came around 3 months later, Marcus showed up without his high-end suit. He couldn't afford his private defense attorney anymore because his accounts were frozen under the preliminary injunction. He was represented by a court-appointed public defender who looked like he had about 4 minutes to review the giant stack of audit evidence we brought to the table. Marcus sat at the defense table, staring at the floor, looking 10 years older than he did the day he walked into that conference room. The judge didn't even take an hour to review the filings. The drag-along clause was upheld as completely valid and binding under state contract law. The stock transfer to Chloe was formally nullified and stricken from the county records. Marcus was ordered to repay the $400,000 in salary disgorgement, plus civil damages for intentional interference with corporate governance. And because he couldn't pay, the court placed a lien on his personal accounts, his retirement fund, and his share of the equity from our primary house. I bought out his half of the house for pennies on the dollar through the court auction process, turned around, and sold it the following week. I moved back into the original family home near the main logistics depot, the place where I actually felt safe, where every corner reminded me of my father instead of a liar. As for Marcus, last I heard, he was living in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, working as a junior entry-level bookkeeper for a small distribution center. No suit, no Mercedes, no executive boardrooms, and Chloe, she actually tried to sue Marcus in small claims court to recover money he had promised her for consulting work, but the judge threw the case out the second our civil fraud judgment was brought up. Looking back on this entire nightmare, I realized something really fundamental about human nature. People who think they can take shortcuts by betraying the people who trusted them, they always leave a trace. They get so blinded by their own greedy ambitions that they forget to read the foundation of what they're trying to steal. Marcus thought he was setting a trap for me by slowly isolating me from the family business while I was sick. He didn't realize that the real foundation had been laid years before he even stepped foot into my life, built by people who actually loved me and wanted to protect my future. What would you have done if you found out your partner was trying to strip your life's work right out from under you? Would you have had the patience to stay quiet until the exact legal moment hit, or would you have exploded the moment you caught them? Drop your thoughts and verdicts down in the comments below, because I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life revenge and legal redemption breakdowns, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. I post a brand new story every single day. Take care of yourselves, keep your eyes open, and always make sure you read the fine print. See you in the next story. Now, if you thought the story ended with the judge handing down that civil fraud judgment, wait until you hear what happened 6 months later. Because people like Marcus, they don't just take their loss and walk away into the sunset. They get desperate. And when desperate people realize the law isn't going to save them, they start doing really stupid things. It was a rainy Thursday evening around 7 o'clock. I was staying late at the depot office, reviewing our mid-year fleet metrics and signing off on 5 new long-haul transport trucks we'd just added to the line. The building was mostly empty, except for the night dispatch team down on the bay floor. Suddenly, my desk phone rang. It was security at the front gate. "Mrs. Vance," the guard said, his voice tense. "Marcus is outside the main gate. He's demanding to come up and see you. He says it's urgent." Now, here's where I'd have lost my cool if this had happened a year ago. My heart would have been pounding. I would have felt that familiar knot of panic in my stomach. But sitting in my father's chair, surrounded by the actual numbers of a thriving business that was finally free of his drain, I just felt this weird, calm clarity. "Do not let him through the gate," I told the guard. "Tell him if he doesn't leave the property within 3 minutes, I'm calling the process server and the local precinct." Wait, let me rethink how fast he actually reacted to that threat. Before the guard could even hang up the phone, I heard heavy footsteps coming up the rear service stairwell. Marcus hadn't waited at the gate. He knew the old keypad code to the side delivery door, a code we hadn't updated yet on the warehouse side. He burst through the double doors at the end of the hall, soaking wet from the rain, holding a soggy manila folder in his hands. I mean, the transformation was terrifying, but not in the way he wanted it to be. He wasn't wearing his $500 Italian shoes anymore. He was in a worn-out jacket, his hair was disheveled, and he had this look in his eyes, that classic look of a gambler who just realized he lost his last chip. "You ruined me," he screamed, stepping into my office and slamming the folder onto the desk. You knew about Clause 4B the entire time and you let me walk right into it." I didn't stand up. I didn't reach for the phone. I just leaned back in my chair and looked at him. "Marcus," I said, keeping my tone completely level. "You signed that document 7 years ago. Nobody forced your hand. You chose not to read it because you were too busy looking at the title on the door." He stood there breathing heavily, his hands trembling. "Do you know what my life is like right now?" he stammered, his voice cracking with self-pity. "I'm auditing inventory for a third-party logistics outfit in an industrial park. Half my paycheck is garnished by the court before it even hits my checking account. Chloe won't answer my calls. My friends from the club won't even take my meetings." Would you have felt a shred of pity for him at this point, or would you have just seen it as total karmic justice? Asterisk. I looked at him, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw him clearly. He wasn't this master strategist. He wasn't this smooth corporate executive. He was just a parasitic guy who thought he could ride someone else's hard work to the top, and the second the host defended itself, he collapsed. "You did this to yourself," I told him. "You didn't just try to leave me, Marcus. You tried to rob my father's memory. You tried to leave me with zero equity in a company my family built from the dirt. I earned that equity," he yelled, leaning over the desk. "I managed the accounts for 5 years. And you paid yourself a salary for 5 years," I shot back. "A salary you now have to pay back because you broke the law." Right at that second, 2 of our night shift dispatch supervisors, big guys who work the loading docks, stepped into the office behind him. Security had called them the second Marcus slipped past the gate. "Everything all right here, boss?" one of them asked, looking at Marcus like he was a piece of trash blocking the hallway. Marcus looked back at the 2 guys, then looked at me. The bravado completely drained out of him. He picked up his wet folder, backed away from the desk, and pointed a finger at me. "This isn't over," he whispered. "I'm appealing the judgment." "Good luck paying the filing fee," I said softly as the guys escorted him out of the building for the very last time. He did try to appeal, by the way. 3 months later, his new attorney, some low-budget lawyer he hired with borrowed money from his sister, tried to claim the drag-along clause was an unconscionable penalty. The appellate court took less than 10 minutes to dismiss the motion with prejudice. Not only did they uphold the original ruling, but they also added another $10,000 in legal fees to his tab for filing a frivolous appeal. Actually, if you look at it from a broader perspective, this whole nightmare turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to Vance Logistics. With Marcus out of the way, we completely overhauled our internal management. We promoted 2 senior dispatchers who had been with my father for 15 years into executive roles. We expanded our regional coverage by 30% over the next fiscal year. And most importantly, the toxic, paranoid energy Marcus brought into the front office was completely replaced by actual trust and loyalty. I'll be honest with you, took me a long time to stop looking over my shoulder. For months after the final court date, every time an email came through with an legal attachment, my heart would leap into my throat. Betrayal by someone who sleeps in the same bed as you changes how you process trust. It makes you question your own judgment. You ask yourself, how did I miss the signs for so long? Asterisk. But then I look at that operating charter sitting in the safe behind my desk. I look at my father's signature on the founding documents right next to Arthur's neat legal script. And I remember that while Marcus was playing short-term games, the people who actually cared about me were building long-term shields. What do you think is the biggest takeaway when dealing with a covert narcissist in a business or marriage? Asterisk. If there's one lesson I want anyone listening to take away from this, it's this. Never let romantic feelings blind you to operational reality. When people show you that their ambition relies on taking shortcuts at your expense, believe them the very first time. And always, always make sure your legal structures are built by people who love you more than the money involved. Marcus thought he had executed the ultimate corporate heist. He thought he was going to walk away into the sunset with my company, his mistress, and a life of luxury built on my family's sweat. Instead, he ended up with a garnish warrant, a ruined reputation, and a stark reminder that you can't build a house on stolen ground. What would your reaction have been if you were sitting in that board meeting when the trap closed? Would you have been able to keep your composure like I did, or would you have let him have it right then and there? Let me know your thoughts, opinions, and your own stories in the comment section below. I read through as many of them as I can every single night. If you found this story satisfying and want to hear more deep dives into real-life corporate drama, revenge legalities, and unspoken confessions, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. I post a brand new story every single day. Thank you so much for listening, stay safe out there, and remember to protect your legacy. I'll see you all in tomorrow's story.